Okay, time for Dark Souls 1. So in Dark Souls 1, your health is important for longer fights, as it says over here. There are diminishing returns after 50, but if you want to keep going, you can keep going. More health is more health. It's pretty easy to die, you know? You can just get a one-shot backstab. Endurance increases stamina up to 40. It also increases your equipment load. And it continues to increase your equipment load past 40, but not your stamina. Your stamina only goes up to, I believe, 160, if I'm right. So once you have this at 40, yeah, 160. As you can see, the calculator is a little wider than the other ones, so it's kind of difficult for me to show the whole thing properly, but we got the general numbers over here. Let's put it like this. Be a little bit. So your endurance, you want to get it up to 40. If you can go with less, that is probably a good idea, actually, because then you can put numbers into other things, but typically everyone is at 40, especially after level, like, 90. Usually, like, level 90 is the point where everyone is finalizing their builds, they're starting to level their health, they got their damage stat to the amount they want it to be at. Just in general for every Souls game, except for probably Dark Souls 2, I'm not sure about that one, because it doesn't use soul level matchmaking. And it wants you to level adaptability, so you can we already talked about. We're talking about Dark Souls 1 right now. So strength and dexterity. They're good to level up to 40, but strength gets a two-handed bonus of 1.5. So if you're making a quality build, you want to get the maximum amount out of both strength and dexterity, and you don't mind two-handing to do that. You could go to 27, because 27, as it shows right here, is divided by 2, goes down to 13.5, but it rounds down, because whenever it's from soft game, whether you round up or down is depending on which one is worse for you, so because it would be beneficial if it rounded up here, it rounds down instead. So you get plus 13, so 13 plus 27 is 40, so 40 is the optimal level to be at. So 27 goes up to 40 when you're two-handing, so you essentially have the maximum amount of optimal strength and dexterity scaling on just a 27 strength and 40 dexterity. However, dexterity also increases spellcasting speed, I believe all the way up to 45 dexterity. This is typically what I've always gone for. It might go up to 50, I'm not completely sure about that. It's pretty inconsistent because it's never the same value between any of the games, so Intelligence and Faith, moving on, are good to level up to 40 for weapons, but spells will of course benefit from more. Typically I get these up to 50. I don't think you have to, I think it's probably better to stay at 40, but a lot of spells, like White Dragon Breath, I believe, requires 44 or 50. Crystal Soul Spear might be 44, I might be getting those mixed up, but Sunlight Spear, I believe, is 50. Something else is at 50. So some things have a 50 requirement, so it's nice to be up at 50, but for weapons, for infused weapons, and weapons that generally have magic or lightning or fire scale, not fire scaling, that's not yet. Magic or lightning scaling, not even lightning scaling now that I think about it. Basically, if they have intelligence or faith scaling, you want to get those up to 40. For spells, they matter a little more. You can get it up to 50, it'll be pretty good. Maybe even 60. You probably don't, you shouldn't do that though, that's like a hard cap. Hard cap's not, just shoot for 40. 40, it's fine. It doesn't do anything else but increase the damage and meet requirements. So Chaos, for infusions, we got Chaos, Lightning, and Raw, which have little to no scaling and are typically stronger with less investment. Raw does not go past plus 10, because weapons go up to plus 15, just to say. So uninfused is better at higher levels, because, as I said, Raw only goes up to plus 10, uninfused goes up to plus 15. So Raw can be buffed, Chaos scales with humanity up to 10, that is to say, it sucks if you don't have 10 humanity. It's probably still good at 9 or 8, but it's not that hard to get 10 humanity. You should always have 10 humanity if you're using Chaos Infusion. And Chaos Infusion is split physical fire damage, just like all the other ones will be, pretty much. Enchanted has more physical damage than magic. Magic has more magic damage than enchanted, than physical. Occult has more physical damage than divine, but typically divine still outdoes it, especially because divine also has the added property of permanently killing skeletal enemies and enemies that typically would revive. Chaos is better than fire while you have humanity. Crystal is strong but cannot be repaired unless you upgrade it. Specifically, that is to say you are willingly having less damage because you're using crystal infusion so that you can repair it and continue to use the weapon. However, with a mule or someone give you items, it's not too difficult to get a whole bunch of the same weapon that's been crystal infused, so... Especially because you can actually trade upgrade materials, so you can just do it by yourself if you really needed to. Especially if you are using something that can be purchased, such as the scimitar, I believe the falchion. Not completely sure about that one. You can buy washing poles and demon greataxes from Shiva, not Shura. Anyway, there's a passive Poise on armor, which is very useful with important breakpoints at 8, 31, 41, 53, 61, and 76. These are 8 is two-handed rapiers, 31 is one-handed straight swords, I believe, or even two-handed straight swords, and curved swords and spears. I always thought it was 36, but apparently it's 31. So 41 would be Great Combustion, 53 is two-handed Greatswords, 61 is Black Flame, and 76 is for Ultra Greatswords and similar weapons. So 53 is also for curved greatswords and also for... I don't remember. I'm sorry, I don't remember. But 76 is also for great hammers and great axes. So if you... The thing is, these are 1 levels higher than the amount of poise damage these weapons will inflict, and this is not including their running attacks. Running attacks inflict higher poise damage, I believe, typically by like 2 to 5 more points. So curved greatswords and greatswords, their running attacks require 56 poise to tank them because they do 55 poise damage. And similarly for other things, if you're really wanting to get every single breakpoint, you should probably look it up yourself, but there's also 81, which is for Great Fireball. I do not know how much you need for Great Chaos Fireball, or if it's exactly the same amount, but I imagine that the Lava Splash also inflicts poise damage, and so you'd have to armor through 2 different amounts of poise damage, and so because if you roll but you still get the hit, you get a phantom hit where it doesn't do damage, but you still do like the status buildup that still also damages your poise, and that's important to think about because in the other games, except for Dark Souls 2, it also does similarly. But anyway, it says right here, and I didn't even realize that all the things I just said, so hopefully you were not reading that while I was saying it because you would be, I don't know, you would think that I'm smarter than I am, I don't know. Attunement slots increase at levels 10, 12, 14, 16, 19, 23, 28, 34, 41, and 50. After that, Attunement doesn't do anything except for probably increases your defenses because as you level up, you get more numbers, more stats, more defense. It's generally useful to have 2 or 4 slots. This is because, well, it's not really. Oh, because of Pyromancy. Pyromancy doesn't have requirements, so even if you're not really using anything, you can have Black Flame, you can be in New Game Plus, and you can ask people what rings they got. Anyway, Resistance is considered a stat that does not give enough benefits. Okay, I didn't do that, but apparently I right-clicked. Resistance is considered a stat that does not give enough benefits to be worth leveling. It increases resistance to poison and slightly raises defenses. So resistance is, as it says, not really that great of something to level up. It does, however, give you defense to a significant amount, whereas other stats do not do that as much. They still do, they just don't do it as much, so it's still like... You still don't need resistance, but it's still like, it's giving you defense. It's pretty cool, but you shouldn't do that unless you've already done everything else. Because damage is so high, it doesn't really matter, you're getting like 2 more points of defense. Because you're gonna get backstabbed, and it's all not gonna matter. If you really wanted to be more efficient, mid backstab, mid parry, you need to switch off your chest armor, put on something way heavier, and then take it off as you're getting back up, so that you can continue to quick roll, fast roll. That would be way more beneficial. Anyway, the Shodel's heavy attacks, these are important because they are the only attacks that pierce shields, and shields are very strong in Dark Souls 1. They didn't really understand how powerful they were for a little bit. The stability on even the small leather shield is significant enough to block multiple attacks, especially because so many people are leveling their endurance. I have a point in my shorter video of Dark Souls 1 explained that shows this off. I am level 42, I have invaded someone in Sin's Fortress. They have a wooden shield, which is a medium shield. It has the wooden shields typically have higher stability than others, but the fact remains that I hit him with 2 kicks and 2 straight sword swings, and their guard, I believe, did not even break until I swung one more time after that. So that means it is a very significant amount of stability on pretty much any shield. Imagine if that was a great shield, I would never have broken that guard. So that is why it's important to remember that the Shodel is able to pierce shields, because that is very useful. It also only requires 14 dexterity. I believe it also requires 10 strength. We can find out very quickly by entering it in over here. Okay, it's 9 strength. So it requires 14 dexterity. You don't always want to have that. You could just reverse roll backstab someone who's turtling up using a shield. It is not always an option because they can have their back against a wall, and in that situation you would not be able to backstab them unless you really manipulated the player model to your advantage, like they slipped up. There's always possibilities, but you can also inflict status effects. We're thinking about how to defeat turtles right now. It's very difficult. You might as well just poison them and then walk away so they can't hit you, but the Shodel's heavy attacks go through shields. They're probably still going to be able to stab you with like a spear or armor through your attack and dark bead you in the face, but you need to be... These are all things that you can do about that. So, dexterity, as it says here, increases casting speed up to level 45. As I said earlier, I'm not completely sure about that, but I am pretty sure about that. I didn't look it up because I was so sure that 45 is the amount to be at if you want maximum cast speed. I also have a character who uses 45 dexterity for maximum cast speed, so I'm pretty sure that's correct. Moving on to daggers. Daggers are majorly dexterity scaling. They are practically weightless, which is to say they weigh 2 units or less. For the most part, I believe there might be one that's 2.5, but they're not as good as a main weapon. They parry in the offhand more often than not. They are best used for riposts, but they are outclassed by other things which get much higher attack ratings, such as the Great Club, or the Chaos Rapier, the rapier that's infused with chaos. But anyway, Bandit's Knife has high critical and can be buffed. I believe it has 147. I do not think it will show us on this, but fact remains, the Bandit's Knife has the highest critical modifier of, I believe, any weapon except for the Dark Silver Tracer, because that has 160. However, the Bandit's Knife can be infused, it can be buffed, you can put Dark Moonblade on this thing, you can have the Hornet Ring, you can do the Hornet Ring with Dark Silver Tracer too, but the Bandit's Knife, you can make it crystal, you can slap Dark Moonblade +3 on it, and then you can just kind of backstab someone for all their health, but you don't really need to do that because there are better options. Anyway, the Dark Silver Tracer has the highest crit and inflicts toxic with the heavy attack. It is one of 2 weapons that can do this. It is, it also leaves silver traces, but it's a dagger. Daggers have really low poise damage. This is why they're not very good as main hand weapons. But if you want to backstab someone, daggers are really good for it. And if you don't want to be a strength build, or you don't have a whole lot of space for using a very heavy weapon, like you just want to be a super armored straight sword build, a dagger is still a useful tool for having in your other main hand slot, your second main hand weapon, that can still do a significant amount of damage. The main problem is there's a rapier that does the exact same thing for about the same amount of investment. So Priscilla's Dagger, however, is an interesting thing where it has high bleed damage, but low bleed buildup. So what this means is if you hit someone with it, it's going to take you like 8 swings, maybe 20, to actually inflict bleed upon your target. However, when you finally do, or if you used a different weapon to build up the bleed first, and you have some sort of third, sixth sense for understanding how much it will take to bleed them out, then you can hit them with the final hit, or the final couple of hits with Priscilla's Dagger, and it will inflict a higher amount of damage on them than if you were using the other weapon, unless that weapon is the Life Hunt Scythe, but yeah. Priscilla's Dagger gets no downside, unlike the Life Hunt Scythe does. Priscilla's Dagger and the Ghost Blade have fun heavy attacks. They do these little spins. The Ghost Blade doesn't do spins, but the Priscilla's Dagger does. The Ghost Blade, however, does multiple slashes, which do like side-to-side slashes, instead of like the jagged Ghost Blade, which does these overhead, like stab your head sort of slashes. And they look very weird if you saw me doing the motion, which you cannot, which is a good thing. The Ghost Blade, however, is very hard to obtain. I believe there are 2, maybe 3 enemies that drop it in the entire game, and they do respawn, which is a good thing. However, they are very deep into the area of New Londo, where there are many ghost enemies, which require you to use the Transient Curse, or be cursed yourself, or use the cursed version of Artorias' Greatsword, or use the Jagged Ghost Blade, or Ghost Blade, which if you already have it, why are you trying to get another one? So you can have 2, of course, but the Ghost Blade's very hard to get. It took me several tries, even with maximum item discovery, when I was making my mule for Dark Souls 1. But regardless, that is how daggers work. You mainly use them as riposte tools, criticals, backstab stuff. So straight swords, mainly strength and dexterity scaling weapons. That means they're quality scaling. They're considered lightweight. They're best one-handed. Oh yeah, lightweight means they are normally 4 units or so. So some of them are 6 units. I believe the Dark Sword is 8 units. I would need to check, but I remember it's similar to the Claymore in weight in Dark Souls 1. They are best one-handed, because you can also use them alongside a shield or something, you know, and they're a little bit faster. They don't take as much stamina, but they're usable two-handed, especially one of them, specifically the first one on here. Typically, they require more skill to use, as in you have to be good at using them, but they're still effective. And the reason this is because they're not as fast as, and they don't do as much poise damage as other things, especially because they're better one-handed. Two-handed things do higher poise damage. The Baldur's Side Sword is the longest. It has high dexterity scaling. Compared to other straight swords, the Baldur's Side Sword is typically considered the best one, I believe. I'm not completely sure about that, but a lot of people like to get it. It's kind of difficult to get, because you can get it from a couple of the Baldur Knights, but they don't like to drop it. They like to make you work for it, and if you get it, it's pretty rare. It's pretty cool. It has a lot of stabbing moves, and it's very reminiscent of the Penetrator's Sword from Demon Souls. You can buff it. It has a lot of thrusting attacks, even when two-handed. It's also very reminiscent of the Lothric Knight's Sword in Dark Souls 3. But moving on, the Dark Sword and Silver Knight Straight Sword have fun heavy attacks. That is to say, they have unique heavy attacks that will get you backstabbed for thinking about pushing them, and they can be effective. It's just, I don't think the Dark Swords are higher poise damage, because typically heavy attacks do higher poise damage. I don't think the Dark Swords do that. But yeah, they're fun. They look cool, but they're not, you know, thrusting attacks, so they still don't do that much significant damage to keep people away from you, or even just to hit people with in general. Anyway, the Silver Knight Straight Sword actually can be buffed, despite being a Twinkling Titanite upgrading weapon, which normally you can't buff them, especially because the Silver Knight Spear cannot be buffed. Is a little strange that the Straight Sword can be buffed, but it's pretty cool that you can do that. It's a little heavier, it likes strength a little bit more, so it likes you to two-hand it, but it's still not all that great. It's kind of cool because you could slap on lightning on it and simulate like you're playing as a Dark Souls 3 Silver Knight, you know? But the Crystal Straight Sword cannot be repaired. This is significant because if you actually thought it was a good weapon, it definitely is not. It is a crystal weapon. It could be good early on, maybe, like if you don't want to upgrade stuff, but it's pretty basic. It's pretty much just a short sword with crystal all over it, I think, and it's not very good, but you cannot repair it because you cannot upgrade it, and because it's a crystal weapon, it's going to break eventually. The Drake Sword has no scaling. It can fire a ground-based projectile with a two-handed heavy attack, and raises your magic and fire defense. This is a thing that the dragon weapons typically do. They raise your magic and fire defense. For some reason, they limited this specifically to the Dragon Tooth and later versions of the game, but Drake Sword does that too. It's a very early weapon that's pretty strong because it has a pretty high base damage with no scaling before you start, you know, progressing your character, so a lot of people will grab it early on and use it for a while until they get the other stuff, but you really don't need to. It's just, it's there. It's an option. A lot of people fall into that. It's such a basic straight sword, and as I'm saying, these are not very effective because they don't do a whole lot of poise damage, and they don't have really good two-handed movesets, so the Storage Straight Sword cannot be buffed, and it has some face scaling that never really benefits it. This changes later on in other titles, but even then, it's still not very good. It also has split damage, but I believe it does have divine properties, so you can use it to kill skeletons, but it's also in front of an undead dragon, and the only really good thing about the Astora Straight Sword is the fact that you can pick it up very early on in the remastered version of Dark Souls 1, and now you are at +5 weapons, so you can have your friend drop every item in the game for you. Yay! It's very easy to get, too. You just need to make sure to get the Master Key, because then you can cut through there, but yeah. Straight Swords. Up next are Greatswords. Greatswords are a varied weapon type, typically considered strength and dexterity scaling, which means quality weapons. They are quality weapons. They are medium weight, that is to say they have maybe 10 units to 6 units of weight to them. They're useful one-handed or two-handed. I believe the one-handed version is the one where I was thinking of earlier, where the poise damage is 35, so you need 36 poise in order to tank it. Lighter variants have a two-handed true combo of running attack, heavy attack, light attack. I believe also lighter variants have a infinite combo using just the basic R1, but that might just be at certain ranges, because I remember I was infinite comboed by a Black Knight Ultra Great Sword, and I didn't think that it had an infinite combo because it was a heavier Ultra Great Sword, but I guess I was too close or at a weird angle. Or maybe we were a little bit laggy. You never know. You never know. And sometimes things are just weird like that. So, typically, Greatswords are the most balanced type of weapon that use their length to compensate for their speed. But it's still not... Because this is Dark Souls 1, you're gonna get backstabbed. It's still an option. It's just, if your opponent's light rolling and they know what they're doing, if you're not at the very tip of your weapon, you're probably going to get backstabbed, so... the Claymore has a far-reaching heavy thrust attack. This is very fun. I know that I fell in love during my first playthrough and I started using the Claymore for a majority of it, but it's still just for fun. It's a thrust attack. It does benefit from counter hits, but it's really just not amazing because it has to be one-handed. It does have a rolling attack that I believe also does this, but again, you need to be careful. The Man Serpent Greatsword is good for strength builds, while the Flamberge is good for dexterity builds. Flamberge also gets the running heavy attack, light attack combo, just like the Claymore, and I believe the other sword that's very similar to the Claymore but does slashing attacks does. The Man Serpent Greatsword, however, does not get this combo. It is not one of the lighter variants. It is, however, very good for strength builds, and it's still pretty cool, but it's heavier, so it's slower, so... Stone Greatsword's two-handed heavy attack emits Tranquil Walk of Peace. This has been a very big problem ever since the game was first out, so you need to be careful of that. Like, not even just because it's Tranquil Walk of Peace, but also because people can tumble buff it, and then you just start dying, and you're like, wow, there was nothing I could do about that. So, Stone Greatsword has that effect. Personally, I like to use it as a sort of, on my stoplight build, to force people to stop running away from me. It's like, stop right there, criminal scum. But anyway, the Moonlight Greatsword is excellent for intelligence builds and raises your magic defense. The Moonlight Greatsword, yes. It's pure magic damage, unlike how it is in Dark Souls 3 and beyond. It's excellent for intelligence builds. It scales with intelligence. I believe it still has its strength requirement, as it likes to do. That's right. So it has 16 strength requirement. However, it's not super heavy. It's actually one of the lighter greatswords, but in this version of the Moonlight Greatsword, it also fires large, explosive blasts of magic, but only when two-handed. If you are doing it one-handed, then it does not do this. It does just the basic projectile. I don't know why they took this away, but they took that away in Dark Souls 3. It's probably just old. They're probably just like, oh, it ran out of power, and it's just not as fun, you know? It's just not as fun. It's not as cool as it was before. Anyway, the Obsidian Greatsword can be buffed. It's a dragon weapon, but it can be buffed. It has an AoE two-handed heavy attack, which emits a bunch of black fire. It's pretty cool, but it's not actually all that great. It's just, it looks really cool, and the AoE is definitely capable of knocking people down. I don't know the exact poise value to armor through it, but you can armor through it. It's a fun greatsword. It's cool. The Abyss Greatsword has fun heavy attacks. This is the one that the DLC Artorias uses. It is the one that allows you to do these giant somersault slashes, or the spinning slash when one-handed. I don't actually remember if it was the L2, the light left-handed, no, not the light, the left-handed heavy attack that does the flip, or if it was the heavy attack, but it's fun. It doesn't do anything else. It's not as amazing as its previous versions, the Greatsword of Artorias, but it's fun. It's definitely fun. It has lower stat requirements, so there's that. The Crystal Greatsword, again, just to point out, it cannot be repaired. It's a crystal weapon. It's not very good. Back in the day, a lot of people used the crystal weapons because normally you cannot upgrade them unless you're cheating, so a lot of people would cheat. They would cause these to be upgraded. Because they don't like that, they become very powerful. So that is why you used to see them. They are a little bit feared, but that is no longer the case. People can cheat a lot harder now, and they don't need to use specific weapons. So anyway, Ultra Great Swords. Mainly strength scaling, heavy weight, and slow. You will get rollback stab. It is kind of the only thing people can do about it, so you're just going to have to accept the fact that if you're using an Ultra Great Sword, you're probably going to get backstabbed. They are best two-handed. Lighter variants have infinite combos with light attacks, such as the Zweihander. I don't believe anything else is comparable to the Zweihander, honestly, but maybe the Great Sword, which is an Ultra Great Sword, is capable of it. I'm not sure. They are slower, but much larger weapons, mainly used for their backstab damage, but sometimes used for their thrust counter hits, which say the Great Sword again, because you can put it, you can make Crystal Greatsword, and then you can be like, use the two-handed heavy attack, and it gets a major counter hit. So it's pretty cool. As it says here, the Greatsword has a thrusting heavy attack that hits hard with counter hits. So you can infuse it with Crystal, you can buff it up, do whatever you feel like, and it does a whole ton of damage. However, landing that is going to be very difficult. It's just, if you do, it will kill people. It will kill people. Zweihander is iconic because of Giant Dad, of course, and has an infinite light attack combo with relatively low stat requirements. It requires, I believe, 24 strength, 10 dexterity, not 11 yet. I believe in later games it will be 11, but the Zweihander, as it is, 24 strength. So to two-hand it, you need 16 strength, because half of that is 8. 8 plus 16 is 24. So it's actually pretty easy to use the Zweihander. You can actually get it really early, too. It's actually a really nice early game weapon. The Black Knight Greatsword has fun heavy attacks. They are very fun. I love anything that can launch someone into the air, and the Black Knight Greatsword has attacks specifically for that. So it is a very nice weapon. It also does bonus damage to demons, because of course it does. All of them do. It's also pure physical damage, unlike how it is in Dark Souls 2. I really don't know why Dark Souls 2 did that, but moving on. Dragon Greatsword fires a large ground-based projectile with the two-handed heavy attack and raises your magic and fire defense. Unlike a couple of the other dragon weapons, this one cannot be buffed. And it's pretty basic. It just fires a large projectile, much like the dragon sword does, or the drake sword does. So it raises your magic and fire defense, and that's really the coolest thing about it, I would say. It is, however, an ultra great sword, so it doesn't have that rolling thrust attack. That rolling attack that is a thrust attack. So you could get some pretty big numbers off of that. But other than that, it's really just used for the gigantic ground-based projectile. It moves forwards, it goes pretty far, it sends people flying, but you can armor through it with enough poise. You just need a whole lot. Moving on, we have curved swords. Very notorious because of a certain PvP guy. They are majorly dexterity scaling weapons. They have somewhat lightweight and particularly fast weapons, which is to say they are usually 4 units or less. I believe the scimitar is 1.5. Pretty easy to put on any build. They are best two-handed, but can also parry in the offhand, so if you feel like being fancy, you can put this in your offhand, and suddenly you can parry while also having a pretty nice side-to-side swinging moveset. It's actually different from its normal, like, right-handed moveset. It's pretty good. It covers, like, a wider area instead of, like, a diagonal. It's pretty cool. They're used mainly as two-handed fast slashing weapons that benefit from a careful use of the full length. Which is to say, you need to play the basic way of keeping the maximum range to hit someone without them hitting you, to punish their every swing and then back away slightly, and to stay as close to them as you can without getting hit yourself, so that you can quickly cover the distance, hit them, and then get away without them being able to hit you back. It's very difficult, but because most people just try to roll backstab someone, they can find that a little difficult to understand. So. The Shotel is the only weapon in the game that can bypass shields with its heavy attacks. You can also buff it, so you can essentially use it the best way that any curved sword can be used, which is two-hand it and then use it to rush people down or to carefully keep your distance from them and slowly destroy them with them unable to do much about it because of your particularly fast weapon. But the Shotel can also bypass shields, so you essentially have turned the most useful weapon in the game into one of the best weapons in the game by using it as your main weapons. The Painting Guardian sword is very strong and includes bleed, but it's extremely short range. It is one of the strongest curved swords, but it is also one of the shortest weapons in the game, so using it as a main weapon is quite difficult because you cannot easily do the spacing game plan. But it is effective because you can basically make it the most powerful weapon in the game. It just has the shortest reach, which makes it very less powerful. But the Gold Tracer, however, also inflicts bleed and has good range, but you cannot buff it, which means that it's still really good because of how long it is and the fact it inflicts bleed. So if someone is behind a great shield, instead of using the Shotel, you could continue to use the Gold Tracer, which will inflict bleed. It's just bleed is able to be avoided, and it's not like the heavy attack is all that great either, but you have to decide what you want. Quelaag's Fury Sword, however, is even longer. It scales with Humanity up to 10. It's the longest, but somewhat slower. Personally, I've been trying to use this on a different character because I can put it in the offhand, and it scales with Humanity up to 10 because it is in fact a Chaos weapon made from Quelaag's soul, much like the Chaos Blade. It's a little bit slower, it's also a little bit heavier, and that's why it's slower, but it has the benefits of all this stuff. It also has a decent amount of fire damage, which is very nice. But not amazing, because, you know, split damage is always like, it has to go through 2 different defenses, but it's still pretty good. So, it's an option. It's pretty cool. It's also because of how long it is. Curved Greatswords, as usual, are always very nice. This time, they might even be one of the better weapons in the game. I know personally, I think that they are one of the most fun weapons in Dark Souls 1 because you can actually use the whole moveset, but moving on, they are mainly dexterity-focused strength and dexterity scaling weapons, which is to say they are quality weapons, but this is typically only the case because they have very high strength requirements. See, it has 28 strength requirement, but it actually scales really well with dexterity. Although we cannot see that because I don't. Let me see if I can help you see that. So we got 354 right here, right? If I start, this is 10 points per dexterity for 2 levels, but this is just 1 for the strength level. 1, 2. Is that 2? 2, yeah. 2, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1. Nothing. 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 So it's definitely a dexterity weapon. I said it was a strength weapon, but because you already reach the two-handed bonus just by getting the requirements to use it one-handed, it still doesn't really benefit from it after a certain point, and even then it's still not all that great. But it's still a very good idea to be able to use curved greatswords one-handed because their one-handed moveset is much wider on their running and heavy attacks. And you can really you can use the full moveset without getting punished too severely, so it's always a good idea to be able to use the full moveset. And the Murakumo is the longest one, so it's generally considered the one to go for because of that, because you can hit people with the extreme length of the weapon. They're heavier than expected, which is not really something you wouldn't expect, but if you're thinking from curved sword to curved greatsword in the same sense of straight sword to greatsword, then it's a little heavier than you'd expect because they have like 20-something units. They are pretty heavy. They require heavy stat investment, which is to say strength, but they mainly scale with dexterity, makes it so that you have to be a quality weapon. They're very heavy, so you're gonna have to plan for endurance around that. You can't get as much poise without being a mid-roll build, which is not really a problem with curved greatswords, which is very interesting. They're best two-handed, but still similar one-handed. They're ideal to use the full moveset. They have heavy and light attacks, which all of them infinite combo. It's crazy. So if you start hitting someone with the curved greatsword, you just keep swinging, and their poise breaks. They are taking this full combo unless they toggle out of it. So, curved greatswords allow you to use their full moveset and command a large area with misleadingly sudden attacks that hit behind you. Because of the way that you swing them with the light attacks, at least, the curved greatswords will hit behind you very slightly, and then they will suddenly hit in front of you, so they're very, very good weapons. Now, the Murakumo is the largest with high dexterity scaling. The server is slightly lighter, shorter, and restores health with each hit. If you don't want to use the Murakumo, you can still use the server. There's the Gravelord Sword, which inflicts toxic if the stat requirements are met, and has a thrusting heavy attack. That is to say, if you do not have the ability to use it one-handed, it will not inflict toxic, I believe, which is probably why I was not inflicting toxic with the build that I used, but it's very fun. The Gravelord Sword is very strong early on, so it works similarly to the other curved greatswords. It's just the thrusting heavy attack is not going to give you an infinite combo, but because it's a thrusting attack, it has benefits just from that. You cannot buff it or anything, but it's still a very powerful weapon, especially early on. Katanas. Katanas are majorly dexterity scaling, surprisingly medium weights, which is to say they weigh about as much as a greatsword does. A katana, usually 6 units, maybe 8 units. They are somewhat stronger two-handed because of the faster recovery on their light attacks. Their light attack true combos off of a kick, which is to say if you kick someone to break their poise, because the kick ignores all levels of poise and just causes a stumbling stagger, you can then hit them with a follow-up of the katana for guaranteed combo. They can parry in the offhand, which they can also do in Demon Souls, which is why they can do it in Dark Souls 1. And all katanas inflict bleed buildup, and they are strong at spacing with their running attacks. Because their running attacks are thrust attacks, they travel a fair distance before slowing down, and they just do a decent amount of damage. Excuse me. The washing pole is of course the longest, as it always has been and will be, but the Iaito, or Iaito, I believe it's Iaito, has fun heavy attacks, which are the big swinging slashes. I believe it's actually best one-handed, because those slashes are faster, which is interesting. I don't know why, the two-handed is a lot slower, but it is, so that's important to note. One-handed is probably better. Chaos Blade scales with humanity because it's a chaos weapon. It scales up to 10 humanity. After that, it doesn't give you any benefits, just like all the others. And it deals small damage to you when it hits anything, including barrels. I don't know if it works against walls. I think you have to actually like do damage to stuff, and technically barrels and boxes and bushes take damage when you hit them. So you take damage. I believe it's 20 health, but I do not remember. You just need to think about that, because you know you're at super low health, might accidentally get yourself killed. So. After katanas, we have thrusting swords. Very powerful, despite their low poise damage. They majorly scale with dexterity. They are lightweight, which is to say they have 4 or less units, and specifically the rapier is 1.5 units, making it a problem. But the rapier, because it's 1.5 units, you can infuse it with chaos, and then it has a high critical modifier, I believe, of 130, making it better than most daggers for backstab. That is what I was talking about earlier, but it has very low poise damage, hits twice with the running attack. This is important because you can buff them, and it'll hit twice with the buff for significant amounts of damage. They're really effective with thrust counter hits, of course, so you can get even more damage, and they're really effective with buffs, as I just said. The S-stock is the longest, so it gets a lot of use. It also has the wide sweeping heavy attacks that it always has. Rickard's Rapier has multi-hit heavy attacks, which allow for some interesting combos during a parry against opponents with poise. It's very difficult, it's frame perfect, and it sometimes relies on your connection to people, and it also relies on their poise value, but you can do what is called an illegal burrito, which is to say a burrito combo that does the maximum amount of damage, and it is definitely going to kill anyone. It allows you to hit them with the heavy attack 2 times, and then you follow up into the Hornet Ring riposte, which is just going to kill them. Typically you have Dark Moonblade at the same time, but that is not guaranteed. So, moving on, the Rapier is an effective riposte tool due to the lightweight and critical modifier. As I said earlier, it has 130 critical modifier, and it's very lightweight at 1.5 units. So you can just slap whatever you want on it, or you can just use it as it is and just have good dexterity scaling, and it'll just work just fine. It'll work a lot better than most other tools of similar weight, and it's typically just the best at backstabbing and being used as an actual weapon, but it's not good at doing poise damage, and it's not good, it's not the best at doing all those things. It's very cheap, it's very light, and it's very effective. So, Rapier. Chaos Rapier. Velka's Rapier scales with intelligence, and it has some fun heavy attacks. So Velka's Rapier, it's an intelligence rapier. It's not generally used, but it does this V motion and then a stab through it. It can be fun to do. I don't really know what the idea was. Maybe it's supposed to be like a Zoro thing, but it's based off of Velka. There's also Velka's Talismans, so it's fun. I don't think it's very good. You can't buff it or anything. It's not very good. Axes, majorly strength scaling. They have varied weights, which is to say some of them are super heavy and some of them are kind of light. That is because of the Golem Axe. Typically, best two-handed for the strength bonus, but effective one-handed, which is to say the Hand Axe and maybe the Golem Axe are pretty nice one-handed weapons, but again, if you're one-handing something, it does less poise damage, and poise is very important. However, you can just kick them. It's just you're not going to true combo off of that kick. It is still nice that you can do that, because the Hand Axe is comparable to the Falchion in speed with its light attacks. But it doesn't have the downside of not being able to kick, because axes can definitely kick things. So that means you could probably do a kick into a light attack and it will true combo, and it scales with strength, so it allows you to, on a strength build, do exactly what that weapon does. Sometimes used as lighter strength weapons, but difficult to use effectively due to their longer recovery on missed attacks. That is because axes and a lot of other weapons have whiff animations, where if you do not hit anything, or if you do hit something but not with the correct part of the animation, like you can hit something with the whiff animation, because there's a specific point in the animation of these attacks where they think that you whiffed, but they still have an active attack hitbox. So that's just something to watch out for. It takes a lot longer to recover if you miss. The Hand Axe has particularly fast light attacks that deal lower poise damage. I don't know the specific amount, but it's definitely not 30-something. The Butcher Knife is one of the larger axes with a far-reaching one-handed heavy attack, and it heals you slightly on hits. It's a little bit slower, I believe, but it's because of how long it is and the fact that it heals you that it's very good. I believe you can also buff it. It's also because of its heavy attack, when it's one-handed, it runs forward, so you could use it on maybe an Iron Flesh build, or a over-encumbered build, and you could do pretty well with that, and that's a pretty cool idea, but... the Gargoyle Tail Axe has fun heavy attacks, which is interesting because the weapon itself will kind of bend because it's, you know, not made of metal or whatever. It's actually the tail of the gargoyle, so that's pretty cool. It scales better with dexterity, so if you, for some reason, wanted to use an axe, but you wanted it on your dexterity build, you can use the Gargoyle Tail Axe on a dexterity build, and it'll work exactly how you want it to. It also raises your status resistances, just because the gargoyle weapons like to do that. The Crescent Axe is one of the larger axes. It's just an axe. It always changes between all the games, but it has split damage with faith scaling. This is to say it does magic damage, but it's a faith weapon. This makes me believe that it's a divine weapon, but I'm not sure about that. Only specific weapons have the divine property. Or the blessed property. It's the divine property. But yes, the Golem Axe is particularly heavy. It's actually, I believe, as heavy as the Black Knight Greataxe, and you can actually say that more confidently because weapons in Dark Souls 1 have proportional strength requirements directly tied to their weights. So the Golem Axe has a strength requirement of 36. That means it has the exact same weight as other things that have strength requirement of 36, such as the Black Knight Greataxe. And the funny thing about that is in Dark Souls 1, if you don't meet the strength requirement of a weapon without two-handing it, and even if you are two-handing it, if you don't meet the strength requirements of any weapon, you get this funny animation where your character cannot swing the weapon because it's too heavy. So you can actually do that with the S-stock on the Sorcerer, if you do not level your strength at all. So it's fun to see. Especially if you're trying to block with something and you try to pick it up to put it in front of you and block it, and it's just like your character is like, I'm too weak, but I'm gonna work out with this giant hammer. It's just funny. The Golem Axe, however, is one of my favorite axes because it actually fires a projectile with a one-handed heavy attack. You can see I have a couple of videos where I use it on a build. It's just, the Golem Axe is too heavy. I wish I could use the Black Knight Greataxe on that build, but it also requires dexterity, and I don't want to go above level 60, but the Golem Axe is very fun. Moving on, Greataxes, majorly strength scaling, particularly heavy. That is to say they are 16 units or higher. They are better, like, instead of just 10 units, but yeah, they're heavy. A better two-handed for the strength boost. Because Greataxes, they don't really have good movesets, I would say. Sometimes they're used as powerful weapons for backstab, but also they have destructive attacks. So you could hit someone just normally, it would still do a decent amount of damage, but they're generally sometimes used as backstab weapons. Because it is an option. But, the Demon's Greataxe is one of the highest damaging weapons in the entire game. It's not the absolute strongest weapon, I believe, but it is the absolute strongest pure physical damage weapon, especially when you infuse it with crystal, and the fact remains you can then buff it. But it's not the highest AR, I believe, attack rating. I believe the Great Club at max stats with Enchanted Infusion is the strongest. Maybe tied with magic, or magic is tied with something else. I don't remember. But the Demon's Greataxe is typically considered the strongest weapon in the game. But it has such a basic moveset and a very slow, heavy attack that you're probably just going to be using it for backstab. The Stone Greataxe and the Black Knight Greataxe have fun movesets. The Stone Greataxe is from the Artorias DLC area. You can get it from the guys that are walking around, I believe. You have to farm it. You can't just pick it up. The Guardians, and they kind of hit you with it. The armor, though, you do have to get by going around picking it up. But the axe is fun. You can buff it, even though it's a Twinkling Titanite weapon. And what it does is, when it's two-handed, if you do the heavy attack, it'll smash into the ground, and then the follow-up will cause a massive explosion around that area where the axe has landed, as you lift it back up. Much like the enemies do. The Black Knight Greataxe has a similar moveset to the Black Knight Greatsword, or Ultra Greatsword, but it also has these giant leaping one-handed heavy attack, which is pretty fun. Again, it does more damage to demons, which is pretty cool. Personally, I just like how it does those uppercut swings. It's just a very fun weapon. The Demon King Greataxe has a massive AoE on its two-handed heavy attack, and you can actually buff it. It also raises your magic and fire defense. This is a very useful weapon if you want to use it at, like, I think 34 strength is what you need. We can actually find out very quickly, but I am quite confident that 34 is in fact the amount you need. So see, we're at 33, 34, and now we can use it. Then that means if you want to make a strength build, you could easily put the Demon King Greataxe on. It'll cause massive AoE. I believe it just pancakes enemies. It doesn't send them flying, it just knocks them down. But it is just very nice because of that. It causes such a massive AoE, it's just so nice. And you can buff it. So it's just a very strong weapon. It's not very big, but I mean, it kind of is, but yeah. The AoE is massive. And I like to use it. So, hammers. Majorly strength scaling. They are lightweight, which is to say they are 4 units, maybe 6 units at times, but typically not. Typically they are lighter than 6, like 2 to 4 units. Better two-handed due to the strength scaling. Again, much like axes, they have the whiff animation. Sometimes they're used as lighter strength weapons which benefit from their strike damage type, which goes through armor defenses better than slash. Axes typically do slash damage, hammers typically do blunt damage, or strike in this case. I don't remember which game used blunt damage over strike damage, but I prefer blunt as the damage type. But the strike damage is typically what hammers are known for. They're pretty good at it. They go through armor defenses. So if you want to use against players, I don't know why you would do that. Because of the whiff animation, it would be quite difficult to actually hit someone with these. But hammers are pretty good for that. Typically the Blacksmith Giant Hammer, which has innate lightning damage and is the largest of the hammers, is the one that people use. I do not believe you can buff it, but I might be wrong about that. But I'm pretty sure you can't infuse it. You can actually just type it in over here real quick. And we cannot infuse it. Which makes sense because it has innate lightning damage, and typically you can't infuse things that have innate elemental damage, in Dark Souls 1 especially. The Warpick is a hammer, which has thrust damage type instead of strike damage type, which allows it to cause high counter damage hits, and it also has some pretty good dexterity scaling. But I think it's still mainly a strength weapon, I don't remember. It's very nice because of the counter damage, so you can actually get some pretty good hits with it, but the problem remains that it has the whiff animation, so if you miss, it's not gonna do that well, but yeah. The pickaxe is similar to the war pick, but it's heavier and it has no dexterity scaling. I believe it has a similar moveset, or maybe it's the pickaxe has the hammer moveset and the war pick has the sort of mace moveset. I'm not sure about that though, I'd need to check again. But they're pretty similar. Moving on, we have great hammers. They are majorly strength scaling weapons. These are particularly heavy, even becoming 28 units with Smo's hammer. They're better two-handed for the strength boost, as they typically are. Smo's hammer also has the highest strength requirement of any weapon. This naturally means, because of what I said earlier, that it is the heaviest weapon in the game, because nothing else has as much of a strength requirement. Normally, great hammers are used as high damage backstab weapons. The rolling attacks are also effective and very difficult to parry. Sometimes the heavy attacks are also very strong, especially on the large club, which inflicts poison and has a fun moveset. I like to use it on my batter, who uses the wide swinging one-handed heavy attacks. Other people like the two-handed heavy attacks because it's just a giant smash, and that is always fun. Grant has Wrath of the Gods, is a two-handed heavy attack, and has high faith scaling. It's pretty strong. It also has split damage with magic. It should also count as a divine weapon. That would make sense. Dragon Tooth. It increases your defense to fire and magic. You can also buff it. It's a pretty good weapon. It has a whole lot of durability as well, I believe. But it's very basic, as most of the larger weapons are. Not a whole lot to talk about. Spears. Spears are mainly dexterity scaling. They are between light and medium weight. This is to say they can get up to like 8 units, and they might be also at 4 units. They are better two-handed for the faster attack recovery, but also effective one-handed because you can attack from behind a shield, much like you can with rapiers. They are very effective on light roll builds that dominate as the longest weapon type. So spears are very long. The way that people like to use them is with the Darkwood Grain Ring, which allows them to get away after doing any attack, so they can keep their distance, and they can also get more distance very easily. You won't be able to parry them for that from that distance. They can dodge pretty much anything, and they can just kind of swing and then get away very easily. It's very annoying, very annoying. You have to predict and also react to their attacks, and just chase after them until they give you an opening. And even then, if you're not using a fast enough weapon, or you don't get behind them fast enough, then they're going to get away from you. It's very difficult to deal with spears. Pike has multi-hitting running attacks and incredible range. This can be fun for a surprise run and stab the enemy. I don't recommend it, but it is an option. Channeler's Trident gives a buff to yourself and allies with a two-handed heavy attack. It also has intelligence scaling and innate magic damage, which is not very important. It's mainly used for the Silly Dance, which is two-handed heavy attack. Demon's Spear is one of the longest spears in the game. It has innate lightning damage. It's incredibly long despite being lightweight with low requirements. It's very lightweight. It has very low requirements. I believe it's 14 strength requirement. Okay, not even. I do not know what the requirement is. Let's see if I can see it on Sorcery. Yeah. Okay, so the strength requirement is 12. Okay. Strength requirement 12. It has a weight of 4. It has innate lightning damage, which means it's very hard to protect yourself from, and it's incredibly long. It also has a heavy attack, which can be difficult to dodge because of how quickly it comes out, but it's also very slow, so if you don't hesitate and you just run up behind them, you can probably backstab someone, but if they initiate it from a particular distance, then it's probably better just to stay where you are and wait for the attack to come out, but it's also possible to parry it. It's just very difficult. It's very surprisingly effective. Silver Knight Spear is also very long, with a sweeping one-handed heavy attack. It also has the Divine property, which means it can kill skeletons. I don't know why you would want to do that, because it's a spear, and therefore it would do thrusting damage, and skeletons don't really care about that, but it is an option. Personally, I like to use this because it has similar requirements as a Claymore, except for less damage, so it's just very nice. Like, it's got the similar strength requirement of 16, because it has the exact same weight of 6. The Moonlight Butterfly Horn is long, lightweight, and ideal for intelligence builds. It's very powerful, it's very good, especially with the flipping idea. It has a similar moveset, I believe, to the Demon's Spear, so there is that. But it doesn't do exactly the same thing. It might be more like a spear moveset, a basic spear, and I might just be remembering wrong. Dragon Slayer Spear is very long, with higher requirements and faith scaling. It shoots a projectile with its one-handed heavy attack. Does it have faith scaling? I believe it has faith scaling, but not a faith requirement, is what it always does. Yeah. It's 24 strength, 24 dexterity. But, it also has innate lightning damage. It shoots a lightning projectile with its one-handed heavy. Its two-handed heavy, however, is instead an attack that will send people flying if it breaks their poise, because as you remember, it is a spear, and therefore it only does like 31 poise damage, maybe 41 with its 40 poise damage with its two-handed heavy attack. I'm really not sure, but the fact remains, the Dragon Slayer Spear does lightning damage, much like the Demon Spear, but I believe it might actually be longer, but I'm not completely sure about that. So you could use this as an effective long-range weapon for the flipping spear game plan. It's very powerful. Halberds. Halberds are the pretty much larger versions of spears. They have strength and dexterity scaling, which means they're quality weapons. The halberd itself is very similar to the claymore. It has 16 strength requirement, and it has higher dexterity scaling. So if you want to use the halberd instead of the claymore, you can do that very easily. They have medium weight, which is to say they are 6 units to maybe 8 units. They're better two-handed for the strength bonus, but they're effective one-handed. In fact, they might reach a little bit farther when one-handed, as they usually do. These weapons have longer recovery on missed attacks, but they make up for it with high thrust counter hits from a distance. Halberds are very good at doing long-range pokes for very high damage. It is still somewhat difficult to do, but the fact remains, you can do it pretty easily. The Lucerne, however, has a really weird moveset. I believe the whole thing is thrust damage, but it's very strange, it's very slow. It also has whiff. It's not very good. I don't think anyone should ever use the Lucerne unless they want to be weird. The Gargoyle's Halberd raises your status resistances, and it has somewhat higher strength scaling than the other Halberds. It's also kind of green because, you know, it's sort of coppery. I guess it's supposed to simulate the stone that the gargoyles are made out of, I'm not sure. Giant's Halberd is much heavier and has innate lightning damage. I don't believe it has any faith scaling, but it's just not a very good weapon because of how heavy it is. But it has lightning damage. It's a halberd. It's pretty cool, but it does the overhead chop, I believe. I'm pretty sure. Moving on, the Titanite Catchpole has fun heavy attacks and intelligent scaling, as well as innate magic damage, but the heavy attacks have you jump into the air and slam down on the opponent, much like the Titanite demons do, and it can cause pancaking if the opponent doesn't just poise through it like they probably will. It's fun. It's definitely fun. Black Knight Halberd has a fun moveset, as all the Black Knight weapons do, except for the Greatsword. I don't really like the basic Greatsword, not the Ultra Greatsword, but the basic one. The Halberd, however, has a fun moveset. It does these spinning slashes, where they can hit multiple times. It hits twice. It's not a good idea, that's one-handed. The two-handed has you jump into the air, much like the Titanite Catchpole does, and smashes down on their opponents, but I don't think it'll pancake like the Titanite Catchpole will. It's pretty fun. It's still a pretty effective halberd. It's not amazing. But the fact remains, it's a Black Knight weapon, so it's still pretty strong, especially against demons. The Life Hunt Scythe and the Great Scythe count as halberds. We do not have a Reaper class. They focus on wider slashing moves. There also are only these 2 scythes, so the Great Scythe has a nice wide slashing moveset. They are completely identical. The Life Hunt Scythe, however, causes bleed buildup on yourself if it hits something, and also causes higher bleed damage. So if you're looking to really hurt someone with bleed and you want to use the Life Hunt Scythe, you should also have higher bleed resistances, just so that you don't bleed yourself out. Life Hunt Scythe and Priscilla's Dagger, made from the same soul, which is of course Priscilla's, crossbreed Priscilla's soul, inflict higher bleed damage when the bleed finally activates. So you can use either one of them to do major bleed damage. It's not recommended, but it is definitely an option. It's pretty cool. The Great Scythe, however, can be infused or buffed. Whips. Whips are fun. They're very bad. They have majorly dexterity scaling. They are lightweight, which is to say they are at most 4 units. They're better two-handed for wider swings, and they can actually parry in the offhand, which is pretty cool. They're generally unused weapons that can't be parried, but also can't perform critical attacks themselves. So you can get a parry with a whip, but you can't actually use the whip to get the riposte. So it could be fun in the offhand. I would say if you want to use the weapon itself, it's better two-handed, because as it says here, they have wider swings. They have really low poise damage as well, and they're not typically considered all that great. It's fun to use at very early levels against people who don't really know what they're doing, or people who cannot really do anything about it, but the Notched Whip inflicts bleed. There's no way to increase that bleed buildup. I don't even think you can infuse it with bleed yet. Guardian Tail inflicts poison. It's probably the easiest way to inflict poison. It has lower dexterity requirements, and it's a very nice, actually, for inflicting poison. You'd probably find it a lot easier to use a bow with poison arrows, but it's an option. Definitely an option. Fists. Fists are not fully fleshed out yet. There's only like 2 of them and also some claws. They are majorly strength scaling. They are lightweight weapons. They can only be one-handed, but can also parry in the offhand. Sometimes used as extremely lightweight offhand options, possibly to avoid using a shield or clash with fashion. So people like to use fist weapons for that. I know that I'm using it on my strength build because of that, and also so that I can actually just punch something. Typically, if it's in your offhand, I would recommend infusing it with lightning, because it's not going to be doing all that much else otherwise. Claws have bleed build-up, because of course they do. They don't really do anything else other than that. They have some pretty fun rolling attacks, I would say. The Dragon Bone Fist boosts magic and fire defense, much as do all of the dragon weapons. This one is a bit more unique, though, because you get it from the Iron Golem Soul. However, that is said to have been a dragon soul, so... And it also has a fun heavy attack, which is a giant Shoryuken that sends people flying. You can parry it, it's fun. It's very heavy, because I believe it has a strength requirement of 20, which means it is, I think, 8 units. And it has low damage, but you can buff it. So I like to put poison on it, because my build is supposed to be the Dirty Colossus from Demon Souls that uses Dragon Bone Fists. But moving on, the Dark Hand has the ability to steal humanity with its heavy attack, and can be used as a shield in the offhand. You can also parry with it, much as you can with the other ones. The Dark Hand, however, is, I believe... Is it physical in this one? Or is it magic? Pure magic damage? No, it's pure physical damage. It's not amazing. It seems to also have an occult modifier, which makes sense, but that's not going to increase its damage. That's just going to make it so it does bonus damage to enemies such as Ornstein, who are weak to occult damage. I do not believe there are very many enemies in the entire game that are weak to occult damage, but it is a thing. The Dark Hand, however, can steal humanity, including from NPCs. I know that I did this a lot. The enemies that have the most humanity are the Priestess from those Knights of Karim, and yeah, Rhea is her name, and Sieglind, who has like even more than her. So if you want to get some humanity, it's pretty easy to just steal it from them. They're not using it, so other than that, you can steal it from players, and you know if you're stealing someone else's humanity and they don't know how to dupe their humanity like a couple of other people do, then, or they're not willing to do PvP to get more humanity because, you know, maybe their build's not ready, or they just can't, or, you know, it's very good to have a Dark Hand available if you find someone who's AFK, because personally I believe if someone's going AFK in a online multiplayer game, then you should be ready to do something about that. At the very least, you should be able to kick them into a spot that they will have to go and find their souls in. I encourage that, because it really doesn't matter. So, the Dark Hand is useful for that reason, because you can steal their humanity. And the Cestus is also pretty basic, it's just 0.5 units. Bows. Bows are majorly dexterity scaling, which is nice that they actually have some. They are lightweight, which is like 4 units or less. I think maybe one of them is a little bit heavier, but I'm not completely sure about that, because their weight should be proportional to their strength requirements, so probably not. They have no moveset, they must be two-handed. You can't really do jump attacks or kicks or anything. They still receive the two-handing boost, which is to say if you two-hand them, their strength will go up. You'll be able to meet the requirements, and I believe also the damage will go up from the strength boost. Not all the games have that, but all of them do allow you to receive the bonus so that you can use the weapon itself. The bows are fast and light enough to be useful at a distance, but mainly effective at inflicting poison. Also counts for thrust counter hits, and can be infused with magic or fire to boost the elemental damage from Dark Moon and fire arrows respectively. The short bow is incredibly light, which is probably the bow that most people will be using, especially in PvP. I'm not completely sure about that. The black bow of Pharos, because of that, is the strongest for dexterity. Definitely one of the better ones. I believe it also has the longest range to it. The composite bow has higher strength scaling. If you wanted to use it on a quality build, the composite bow is nice for that, but the short bow is lighter than the composite bow, so you never know which one you'd rather have. The Dark Moon bow, however, scales with Faith. And because all the Dark Moon stuff likes to do this, it has magic damage, but that Faith already was magic damage in this one. It doesn't have lightning damage, which is a good thing. And it even has its own ammo type in the Dark Moon arrows, but you might actually be better with a magic-infused composite bow, depending on how your build is, and you should just use the Dark Moon arrows instead of the Dark Moon bow. But the Dark Moon bow is definitely an option, especially since the bow itself already has scaling, and you can't get Faith scaling without going Divine property, and Divine is typically not as good as Magic, and you don't really need Faith scaling, but the fact remains, if you are a Faith build, you can use Magic with the Dark Moon bow like that. So that is an option, but there's also fire arrows, and you probably just want to use poison anyway, so those are the things. Those are the things. Those are bows. Greatbows. Greatbows are different, there's only two of them. Dexterity and strength scaling, that means they're quality weapons. You definitely want more and more numbers, so you can do more damage, more numbers, more big number damage. Greatbows are heavyweight. I believe the Dragon Slayer Greatbow, much like it does in other games, has a 20 strength requirement, yes, and 20 dexterity requirement, much like it does in Dark Souls 3. They don't have a moveset, they must be two-handed, and they still receive the two-handing bonus, which means the two-handing boost. You have no idea how many times I wanted to say bonus, and I had to correct myself because the first time I did it I said boost, but either way it makes sense, so Dragon Slayer Greatbow, because it has a 20 strength requirement, you can actually get 14 strength, 20 dexterity, and then two-hand it. Okay, 15? This is not strength, is it? No, that's strength. Okay, so the calculator is wrong. Because you can definitely two-hand it. The calculator is just lying. It doesn't understand. I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure I went and tested this. Oh well. I know it works for bows. I did it with the bow. Oh well. Even if you can't use it properly, it's still really useful. There's only 2 great bows and 2 arrow types, and the main use is to send people flying off of small platforms. Which you can still do, as I say here. The Dragon Slayer Greatbow is useful to have, even without the requirements, because it still causes knockdown on medium poise targets. That is to say, if you have an incredible amount of poise, I believe it's 81, something crazy like that, I don't know, it might be 100. Then you will not get knocked down, you will instead just get a very long stagger animation. But most people will just fall outright and just get launched off of stuff. If you block a great arrow, you are definitely going to fall, because that is going to launch you farther backwards than you would have if you actually had enough poise to tank the shot itself. So blocking a great arrow is not a good idea either. Go's Greatbow is just simply stronger, it has higher strength scaling, it's generally just the better option. And of course there's only 2 types of arrows as well, with Go's arrows doing stronger damage. Doing more damage. Greatbows are pretty basic. On to that we have crossbows. Crossbows, also I'm gonna go ahead and boot up Dark Souls 1 and check if bows actually receive that bonus. If you hear anything in the background. Okay, so crossbows have no scaling unless infused. You can infuse crossbows, I'm pretty sure. I'm going to check really quick. I'm pretty sure people, yeah, you can infuse them with lightning and use lightning bolts. That's typically the best way to use crossbows. Crossbows are light or medium weight. That is to say, the Avalon has a strength requirement of 16. That means, much like the Claymore, it has a 6 units of... It has 6 units of weight. Crossbows don't have a moveset, but you can use them one-handed or two-handed, and typically the one-handed moveset is better so that you can use other stuff with them, and it reloads faster. It's still not all that great. Sorry, that was Dark Souls. If you could hear that. What were we doing? We were testing whether bows... Right. Turn that way down. Okay. So... Crossbows don't really have a moveset, but like I was saying, they're a little bit better when one-handed, and you reload a little bit faster, things like that. Okay, yeah, you do not actually get the strength bonus from two-handing a great bow, but as I was saying, you still benefit from having a great bow. It's still a good idea to have one, because it'll still knock people. Anyway, crossbows cannot be aimed, and you cannot control when you reload them. They fire slowly, they force you to reload them, and they can be used to suddenly shoot someone, especially with lightning bolts. The Avalon fires 3 shots at once, which makes it more likely to hit someone and also inflicts decent damage. The Avalon is typically the better choice because you will fire more shots and therefore more likely to hit someone. The damage, it's not as good as maybe in... I think it's called the Arbalist in this one, or it's just the heavy crossbow in this one. The sniper crossbow is particularly slow. If you wanted to be silly, and you wanted to be like, you wanted a very big challenge, you could use the sniper crossbow as your main weapon. It is considered the worst weapon in all of the Souls games, just because, especially in Dark Souls 1, if you don't meet the strength requirement, you can actually use this, and it will have a extremely slow recovery animation, because not only do you have to recover from the actual shot, you also have to reload the actual crossbow. So, it's very difficult to use the sniper crossbow effectively, and you cannot aim with it in Dark Souls 1. You have to free aim this thing, and it's very difficult to use. You can, however, infuse it and make it worse. No, you can infuse it with lightning and make it a little bit better. So, moving on, we have staves. We're getting on to magic. Staves have majorly intelligence scaling, most of the time, of course. They are lightweight at about 2 to 4 units sometimes. I think one of them is less than that, probably the Ulasil Ivory Catalyst. They are best one-handed, but they still receive the two-handing bonus. That is to say, a couple of them that scale with strength will receive the two-handing bonus. Staves are used to cast sorceries, but some can also be used as crude melee weapons. I had more, but I apparently forgot about it. Demon's Catalyst counts as unupgraded and has a thrust attack as the heavy with innate fire damage. The heavy attack of the weapon is a thrust attack, which also includes, the whole thing includes innate fire damage. Which means staves don't count as weapons that require an upgrade, so if you get the Demon's Catalyst, you can use it as a somewhat effective melee weapon. It's still not an effective melee weapon, but it is somewhat effective. It also has the thrust attack, but the problem is elemental damage doesn't benefit from that. It is purely going to be the physical damage of the staff itself. But it's still a thing, it's still a thing. It's typically not good for actually casting magic, but it is silly. It's silly. Logan's Catalyst has the highest sorcery scaling with no downside. That is to say, other things are stronger than it, but they typically have a downside. Beatrice's Catalyst and the Islith Catalyst have the same scaling as the Sorcerer's Catalyst, but they look cooler. They are exactly the same weight, they do exactly the same thing, but they look cooler, because it's not the basic Catalyst, is what I would say. So, Ulasil Ivory Catalyst has a set sorcery scaling, which also the Ulasil Catalyst does, but I believe it might be lighter than the Ulasil Catalyst, the Ulasil Ivory Catalyst, and the Ulasil Catalyst also inflicts poison with heavy attacks, so they're similar, they're weird. This one's a lot harder to get. I don't recommend it, and just use the Ulasil Ivory Catalyst. Tin Banishment Catalyst has dexterity scaling, which can apply to dark sorceries, which is fun. It's interesting. Most of the time things just have strength. This one has dexterity, so you're going to be doing dexterity anyway. You might as well, if you want like faster cast speed, you might as well use a Tin Banishment Catalyst. It's still not like incredible. It's probably not better than Logan's Catalyst, but the fact remains, Tin Banishment Catalyst has that effect. The Tin Dark Moon Catalyst uses faith instead of intelligence, which is important to note, because that's really weird. I don't think it's a good idea to ever use the Tin Dark Moon Catalyst, but it's definitely an option. It's definitely interesting. The Mantis Catalyst has strength scaling, which boosts dark sorceries. It also halves your casts. The reason the Tin Dark Moon Catalyst isn't all that great is because, you know, in order to use sorceries, you still have to meet the intelligence requirements, so if you want to use anything particularly powerful, you wouldn't be able to do that. It's basically for like the cheaper spells. Moving on, the Mantis Catalyst has strength scaling, which boosts dark sorceries. It also halves your cast. The Tin Banishment Catalyst does the same thing without the halving the cast, but it boosts dark sorceries because of the dexterity scaling. The Mantis Catalyst does that with the strength scaling. It also halves your cast. It's not typically the strongest catalyst because, of course, Logan's is pretty good, but compared to the Tin Crystallization Catalyst, which is just better. The Mantis Catalyst is also a crude melee weapon. You can actually use it to smash someone. It's pretty cool. But it's a little bit better at dark sorceries. Kind of. It's still not really good. The Tin Crystallization Catalyst is the strongest catalyst. It has the highest sorcery scaling. It works as a modest melee weapon, which also halves your casts. It also does thrust attacks, much like the Tin Banishment and the Demon's Catalyst do. And it's just better at them. It's just better at everything than all of the other ones. It's just it also halves your cast. So if you wanted to use it for something like Soul Arrows, it's still pretty strong. It's still like better than Logan's Catalyst. But I think you need like 44 intelligence before one of these is even better. And I'm not really sure. Like then the Beatrice, Izalith, and Sorcerer's Catalyst. These are typically the better ones until a certain amount, and I'm pretty sure it's like 44. But I don't remember, so you just have to get them and find out. And it's also kind of difficult to get the Tin Crystallization Catalyst, because you have to do Logan's entire quest line, but that is something that's in the way. And I actually have Sorceries immediately after this, unlike the other ones. So Sorceries, we have Soul Arrows, which are basic low homing attacks that have several casts. So if you want to use the strategy I said, where you are going to be having your casts, you can also use the Dust Crown Ring to boost your casts back up. I don't think you should do that, because it also lowers your health a significant amount, but it is an option. Soul Arrows are just very nice because you can have a whole lot of them. Homing Soul Mass is very useful because you can turn away from enemies to prevent it from firing and turn towards them at any point to fire. This has always been the case, it always will be the case. They are very useful. It's just how Homing Soul Masses work. The Crystal one, I don't believe it has piercing yet, but I might be wrong. It definitely should still work similarly to how it does in the other games. You can bump into people with them and then fire them off. Soul Spears have few casts, but do high damage and can pass through multiple targets. Also, Soul Mass, the number of orbs you get are based off of your intelligence. I believe it works similarly. So you want to have like 30-something, 32, I believe, to have 5 orbs. Pretty much, you have the stat requirements for Crystal Soul Mass, then you probably get all the orbs. So Soul Spears, as I said, they have few casts, they do high damage, they can pass through multiple targets. They're very strong. For a while, the desync was so big that it didn't look like these were headed straight for you, so you had to just roll out of the way the moment you saw them being cast, even if it didn't look like it were going towards you. So Soul Spears are pretty dangerous. I don't think they do that anymore. I'm pretty sure they fixed it, but Soul Spears are pretty strong. They're always very strong. But they're just very similar to Soul Arrows, so Soul Arrows might just be better if you're fighting one target who's just paying attention, you know? And then the magic weapons are always useful to turn your intelligence into a melee weapon. If you have a plus 15 upgraded weapon, maybe like a falchion. If you have a falchion, you want to make an intelligence build, you get 15 intelligence, use great magic weapon, slap that on there, and then you have a pretty good build already. There you go. But you can also get to 25 intelligence, and then slap on Crystal Magic Weapon. It's comparable to Dark Moon Blade, and you can just go nuts with that. The utility of Sorceries is not as good, however, so... And the fact remains that Staves are heavier than Talismans, so it's up to you whether that's a good idea or not. Magic Shield is really strong because shields are already really strong, so making them even stronger with Magic Shield is pretty good. You don't really need to. But Magic Shield lasts even shorter amount of time, but the fact remains you can block pretty much anything once you do this, so you could already do that, but now you're not even taking any damage whatsoever, so just use a Great Shield, but if you don't want to, you want to make like a magic build instead, you can do that. It's an option, it's an option. Dark Orb is slow to cast, but can catch people by surprise because they're looking for Dark Bead, which is strong up close, but most players are prepared for it. It's pretty easy to roll through Dark Bead. Dark Bead at max cast speed is really not that much different from how it is normally. I would say that having it be slower is actually more of a problem, but I don't know. I don't know which one you're likely to see more. I know that I've cast Dark Bead, it didn't really feel like it was that much better. It could just be people are predicting it now that they saw it once, but you know, Dark Bead is really strong. You'll one-shot most things with it. It's ridiculous. It's insane. But Dark Bead is also kind of hard to get. But that's the thing. So Dark Fog is an easy way to inflict poison, but poison isn't very strong. You don't really need to inflict poison very easily, especially considering this is taking up one of your spell slots, and you don't really have a lot of those most of the time. Pursuers are just a stronger form of homing soul mass. It's a lot slower, but that's a good thing because it has more homing capabilities, especially if you like desync them. Someone cannot see what's happening, they just float over to them and they just die. Pursuers do so much damage. You can get it very easily. You can actually trade it to other people. It's crazy. Because you can actually drop the boss soul for them. So we got Talismans. Talismans are majorly faith scaling. Nearly weightless at, I believe, 0.3 units. I'm not sure. Might be 0.5. I'd have to check again. They have no real moveset, but they're best one-handed. Which is to say you don't really want to two-hand them, but you have the option to. You can't really hit someone with them, but you have the option to. It's just not going to do any damage. It's going to do like 5, I don't know. They're required to cast Miracles, which have few offensive options, but several supporting options. So, Thorolin Talisman has the highest. I looked this up. I know this is correct. Thorolin Talisman has the highest miracle scaling, up to 27 faith. The Canvas Talisman has the highest miracle scaling, from 27 to 39 faith. There are some in between this one and the Dark Moon Talisman, but they don't matter because these ones all 27, 27, 39, 39, and higher. So Dark Moon Talisman has the highest miracle scaling from 39 and higher faith. If you don't want to get the Dark Moon Talisman, there are the other options of the Saint Talisman, the Sun Talisman, but why would you do that? Just get the Dark Moon Talisman. You could just join for like a second, the guy will hand it over, and that's cool. That's it. I think you might actually need to get plus 10 in the Covenant, but I don't remember. Velka's Talisman scales with Intelligence instead of Faith, which is quite useful for some of the miracles, such as Gravelord Swordbands, because that one doesn't have any requirements, so you can just use it on a Intelligence build and be like, okay, I'm gonna use this miracle now, and they'll be like, wait, you're a magic build though, and then a whole bunch of swords appear out of the ground. But you could just do that with Pyromancies for the exact same idea. It's still an option. It's still cool. You do you. I know I did that. Miracles. Healing miracles are not usually necessary now that invaders are allowed to use Estus to heal, but miracles also heal allies, I believe. That might not actually be a thing, now that I think about it. I kind of just assume that because I've been playing all the other games more than Dark Souls 1, but there are the Sun Princess miracles, which do heal allies, and I think that was their whole gimmick, so maybe the other ones do not. Regenerative miracles can be useful, but they won't stack with similar body buffs. So regenerative miracles are nice, but you know, they're not going to work with Power Within, Karmic Justice, Tranquil Walk of Peace, or Great Magic Barrier. They're still cool. If you want to run a regen build, it's definitely an option. It's just a lot. It's just very difficult to do because there's really only like 3 different sources of regeneration. Force is a weaker AoE that can ignore Poise and knock down targets with under 21 Poise. So if you just spam Force on someone, it'll do like 20 Poise damage, and it won't knock them over, but it will stun them, and it's pretty good for that. It's basically like a kick, but I don't know. Why would you use this instead of a kick now that I think about it? I guess like the AoE is harder to dodge, but like, I don't know. You could just kick them. Why don't you just kick them? Is the stun longer if they block it? I don't know. I'd have to test that. Well, I do know that Force does get a range bonus, and some of the healing miracles get stronger depending on the white circles you see on the ground, and depending on how many are close to you. So that is something. Wrath of the Gods definitely also benefits from that. It's a popular spell that ignores Poise and deals magic damage over a wide area. Oh right, because Force... No. Anyway, Wrath of the Gods is a popular spell that ignores damage. It does magic damage. It does magic damage, because everything Divine does magic damage in Dark Souls 1. They didn't really want things to have lightning damage yet, I guess. But Wrath of the Gods is really good for that. Emit Force is a projectile that causes a small explosion on impact. It's generally easy to avoid due to the slow speed. If you can get it to fast speed, it's still not a very big explosion like Wrath of the Gods is, but I'd say it's pretty cool. And it makes a really loud noise. And it has a pretty cool cast animation. And you can sort of just spin around while trying to aim it. It doesn't have any gravity to it, so it's not going to travel in an arc. You do have to aim it at the ground if you want it to do anything particularly great. But yeah, it's an interesting idea. Magic barriers shut down magic damage with how much defense they add, so you could use Magic Barrier, Great Magic Barrier, your opponent uses Dark Moonblade or any sort of crystal magic thing. It just doesn't work anymore. You can just walk through that. You might get stunned, but you can just walk through that. Karmic Justice, personal favorite. It causes an explosion around the user once they have been hit enough times. 5 hits that cool down, much like the consecutive attack up things. And the damage scales with your main hand weapon's magic adjustment or magic damage, depending. So if you have a staff in your right hand, it would scale with your staff's magic adjustment. If you had your talisman, same thing. But if you have the Moonlight Greatsword, it scales off of your magic weapon, your magic damage. And typically, if something doesn't have magic damage, then it counts as base, and it'll just do the base amount of damage. So Karmic Justice is best used with something that does a lot of magic adjustment, such as the Tin Crystallization Catalyst, or the Moonlight Greatsword. So, those are options. Karmic Justice is very nice. Very fun. Especially if you walk into lava, and you get hit 5 times very quickly, and then you just suddenly blow up and it hits everyone, and it's fun. Of course, you wouldn't be able to use it while you're in the lava. You can use it outside of the lava, quickly go into the lava, and then blow up. But if you were already in the lava, it's just going to blow up and no one's going to be there. So yeah, Tranquil Walk of Peace is of course very powerful. It causes an AoE debuff that prevents others from rolling if they're in range of it. It's very strong. If you see someone using this, you need to get away. You need to run as far as you can. It only lasts, I believe, 15 seconds, but 15 seconds is more than enough for people to surround you and start beating you up. And there's nothing you can do about it. Lightning Spears are somewhat slow, but can deal major damage and will cause AoE splashes in water and wet surfaces. They're very slow, they're not very good, takes a while to cast them. Sunlight Spear, I believe, is locked behind a Covenant. I don't know if you can even use it outside of the Covenant, but it might take 2 spell slots as well, I do not remember. But Sunlight Spear is very hard to use, and neither the Lightning Spears is very hard to use. You can throw them in water, it's probably your best choice at actually hitting someone with them, but it's definitely an option. Lightning Spears are very fun. Sunlight Blade is a powerful lightning buff, and Dark Moon Blade is the most powerful magic buff. These are the 2 miracle buffs. Dark Moon Blade gets even stronger. It gives you magic damage, much like all the Dark Moon stuff does. It doesn't like to give you similar things to other miracles, so it does magic damage. And the higher your rank in the Covenant, the stronger it gets, making it actually better than Sunlight Blade until someone uses a magic barrier. Or has a crest shield. Anything that can block magic damage, really. Because lightning damage is a lot harder to block, so when someone uses magic barrier, you might as well just switch to Sunlight Blade. And so yeah. Gravelord Sword Dances do not have a level requirement to be used, and therefore are still effective on intelligence builds with Velka's Talisman, like I said earlier. They're pretty cool. They also work exactly the same way as Firestorm, so you don't really need to do that. Pyromancies. Fireballs cause AoE explosions where they land and can inflict significant damage. I would recommend using the larger ones, but more fireball, more fire. It's fun. Combustions are fast, close range attacks that are very effective. Black Flame especially is good at breaking guards. If someone blocks Black Flame, Gonna do a significantly larger amount of stamina damage than Great Combustion would have, but Great Combustion does more damage than Black Flame does. So. Also, at max cast speed, you can actually kick someone and then hit them with Black Flame or Great Combustion. I would recommend Great Combustion because of the higher damage thing, but yeah. I forgot about that. Firestorms cause random fire pillars to emerge and attempt to knock down those hit by them with significant damage and are especially useful when cast from higher locations because it will actually cast them below you. The fires do not go up, they only go down. Each pillar takes away from the maximum casts, making consecutive casts have fewer pillars. That is to say, you start with 20 casts of Firestorm, and it goes down to 6. That means you cast 14 pillars, and next time it's only going to cast 6 pillars. So, if you have more than one cast, it's just really weird. It's really weird trying to get the most use out of your Firestorm casts. So. Poison and Toxic Mist cause large clouds that are difficult to see through. Acid Mist also does this, but it's not very good. It doesn't really have an effect that it does. It can force your opponent to spend some souls, sit down at the bonfire, but you really don't need to do that. It doesn't really destroy their equipment fast enough for it to matter, but it is still an inconvenience if you wanted to be annoying, I guess, but they're gonna have to do that anyway, so it doesn't really matter. It'd be more inconvenient to steal their humanity because then they'd have to farm up some more if they didn't know how to duplicate it. So these are ideas. The main way to use them is to cast one of these mists. It's very difficult to see through, so you could throw a sunlight spear through it, and they also inflict dot status effects. Toxic especially is particularly effective. Not only for the damage, it also lowers stamina recovery, which can be very debilitating. A Fire Whip is difficult to use, but can inflict decent damage in a small area. It only hits once, and it does very low poise damage, I believe. And Chaos Fire Whip is a stronger version of it that they never replicated, that also leaves splashes of lava on the ground. It's pretty cool. It doesn't last very long, though. But it's pretty cool. It does take up 2 spell slots to use Chaos Fire Whip, but the fact is, it only exists in Dark Souls 1. So that is a thing. It also splashes on whatever the Fire Whip actually touches, and none of the other ones really work like that. Chaos Firestorm, it only spawns on the ground. Chaos Great Fireball, it only spawns where it lands. Fire Whip, it's spreading lava everywhere. Fire Surge does small damage to a short range ahead of the caster. It has mini casts, and it can be held. It also hits very quickly, so on a sort of high damaging, low health build, you could kill people by running towards them with fire, but they're going to hyper armor through it at the same distance that you can hit them at, they can hit you at, and they'll probably just run up and backstab you. So it's not going to be fast enough, but it can be satisfying. It can be very satisfying. I know that even in Dark Souls 3, I used Fire Surge without its full potential, just to make sure that I could finish off people who had very low health. So you could probably use it a similar way in Dark Souls 1, but you probably don't need to. So Iron Flesh adds a unique weight state that prevents running and rolling. It doesn't prevent rolling, I tested this, you can still fat roll. But it deflects physical attacks greatly, and greatly increases physical and fire defenses, not your lightning defenses. It lowers your lightning defenses. Because it makes sense, you're made out of metal. You can also, you can deflect physical attacks, but the problem is it slows you down so much in such a fast-paced game, so you're just gonna get backstabbed. You might not die from it because of the defense boost, but you could get chain backstabbed, and you can't really roll away because you're fat rolling now, and it's generally not considered a very effective strategy, but you can use it alongside longer ranged attacks, such as with spears, or with the Butcher's Knife, things like that. Something with projectiles, you never know. You could be an Iron Flesh Mage, it would be an interesting idea. I don't think it would be very good still, but it's an option. Power Within vastly boosts all damage and increases stamina regeneration. I actually tested this. I went and tested it. I made sure it does actually boost the damage of everything. So I think if you're using a buff, it's going to be an incredible amount of damage. But I actually didn't test buffs, so it does work with like lightning spears though, and fire bombs, things like that. And lastly, we have shields. So, small shields, medium shields, great shields. Shields are strong, and even weapons can be used to block with little downside. Yes, you can actually block with all these weapons. So because stability is so good, you can actually block using weapons. But shields are even stronger than that, of course. But great shields cannot parry and instead have really high defensive properties. Small shields are much lighter, but medium shields often have bonus effects, which is counter to, I think, Dark Souls 1. No, Elden Ring. Counter to Elden Ring. Medium shields often have bonus effects and 100% physical defense. So, small shields, you generally would like to use a small shield if you want to parry. But most people will have the Grass Crest shield because the Grass Crest shield does stamina regeneration and stacks with itself. So, the effigy shield is a small shield. It's really good at blocking lightning damage, which, as I've been saying, lightning damage goes through most defenses. So the effigy shield is the best one at blocking that. The small leather shield is the lightest shield. It only weighs 0.5 units. It's very easy to get. It's very effective. The Dark Hand is similar, but the small leather shield has higher stability, so it is the preferred option if you're going to be using it to block things and also parry stuff, even if the Dark Hand has an 80% damage reduction in every element and every damage type. The small leather shield is still typically the best shield to use if you wanted to have a very, very, very light shield. So the crystal ring shield, instead of parrying, fires a projectile, which is not very strong at all, but it's supposed to be a replication of, apparently, I think it was Omega Man, or what was his name? Ultraman. And it's very good at blocking magic. So it can block a lot of magic damage. So if someone has like homing crystal soul mass, you have what was it? Karmic Justice. If you have Karmic Justice active, your opponent has homing crystal soul mass, you can use the crystal ring shield to block all of that, and you'll take very little damage from it, and your Karmic Justice will go off because you just got hit 5 times. The Heater Shield has 100% physical defense with low weight. It also has the bonus property of having really good parry frames, as it counts as a small shield despite being a medium shield. As it says in its description, it is actually like one of the lighter medium shields, and because of that it gets this effect where it has 100% physical defense, but it's also really good at parrying. This is not very significant, but it's still a thing. I never really had problem parrying things, because the parry frames start early, and they don't, like, you parry as you see something happening, but the Heater Shield is typically considered one of the better ones for it, which is why the Crestfallen Warrior can parry you so easily. But anyway, the Sanctus has small regenerative effect, and it stacks with itself. The Balder Shield has high stability for a medium shield. The Grass Crest Shield boosts stamina regeneration and stacks with itself. Everyone uses the Grass Crest Shield just because of that. The Blood Shield boosts all status resistances and stacks with itself. It's ideal for Life Hunt Scythe builds. The Pierced Shield has thrust counter hits and can be a decent weapon that blocks and attacks because it has the thrust counter hits. It's a very interesting playstyle. The Spike Shield similarly can be used as a weapon that inflicts bleed. I don't think it's as good, but it's still an option, especially because it can block and attack much like the Pierced Shield, but the Pierced Shield is probably better. The Crest Shield blocks physical and magical damage greatly, which is ideal against Dark Sorceries. So if you really wanted to block Dark Sorceries, which you really shouldn't because they do a lot of stamina damage, the Crest Shield is pretty good at that. The Black Knight Shield is the best medium shield. It has really good stability. It has really good defenses. It blocks fire damage very effectively, so it can block Great Combustion and other such things very easily, which Great Combustion is very difficult to react to, so that is quite useful. Tower Shield has the highest stability out of all shields. You can even infuse it with Crystal to make it have even higher stability, but it will of course destroy its durability. It is, however, an option. Havel's Great Shield can add a deflect buff with its heavy, which is to say it gives you a very similar effect to if you use Iron Flesh, where it causes you to fat roll, you have to slow walk, but the fact remains that Havel's Great Shield will do this to you. It's very nice to have, especially on my character who was the Dirty Colossus. And it looks a lot better than having iron flesh because it's supposed to be a junk thing, so that is it for Dark Souls 1. Again, you should have about 50 health, about 40 endurance, and then 40 strength or dexterity. Maybe for 27 strength, 40 dexterity if you want to be super optimal. The less endurance you can go with, the better, but it's very difficult if you're mid-rolling. Fat rolling is unacceptable unless you have very long range or a whole ton of poise. On top of that, you could use a close range weapon to keep people away from you and from backstabbing you. And you need to understand how backstabs work more than anything else. Typically, if you've been backstabbed, it is useful to wait a few seconds to roll, otherwise your opponent is going to be able to backstab you again. However, that has been less the case lately. People have instead been trying to do the kick on wake up, which allows them to then go up behind you and backstab you. But connections have generally been better from what I've seen, and that doesn't happen as often anymore, and you might be able to actually swing your weapon because people aren't as sweaty or as knowledgeable as they used to be. So go ahead and have fun in Dark Souls 1. Yeah, and that'll be it.